The afternoon sun beat down on the dusty playground, turning the metal slide into a scorching hazard. Dong Dong, his face flushed with the exertion of play, tugged at Lin Hao's hand. "Higher, Uncle Lin Hao. Push me higher." Lin Hao obliged, a faint smile touching his lips. He watched the boy soar through the air, landing with a delighted squeal in the sandbox. A familiar pang of something he couldn't quite name pricked at his conscience. "He's about Yu's age." He quickly pushed the thought away, focusing instead on Dongdong's infectious laughter. Sun Yan's probably nagging her about piano practice again. He pulled out his phone, half expecting a barrage of messages from his wife. The screen was blank. Good. Maybe she's finally learning to give the kid some space. The buzzing in his pocket startled him. It was Sun Yan. "Lin Hao, where is she? I've been calling her phone, she isn't answering." Her voice was tight, laced with an anxiety that always grated on his nerves. "Relax," he said, his voice tinged with impatience. "She's probably just playing with her friends. You worry too much." He could practically hear her agitated sigh through the phone. "She's not with her friends. I've checked." "Where are you?" "I'm out," he answered vaguely, already regretting picking up the call. He was supposed to meet Jiao Jiao for dinner, a rare chance to reconnect with the girl who had occupied his thoughts since high school. "Look, I'll call you later. I need to go." He hung up before Sun Yan could reply, a knot of irritation tightening in his chest. Why does she always have to make such a fuss? He shoved the phone back into his pocket, the insistent buzzing starting up again almost immediately. He ignored it. Sun Yan's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the rising tide of panic. Yu was never out of contact. Never. Each unanswered call was a cold fist clenching around her throat. She raced through the park, her eyes scanning the playground, the swings, the shaded areas beneath the trees. Empty. The image of Yu's bright, trusting face flashed before her eyes, intensifying the sickening dread that was slowly consuming her. "Where are you, baby?" The setting sun cast long shadows across the city as Lin Hao and Jiao Jiao sat across from each other in a dimly lit restaurant. The familiar comfort of Jiao Jiao's presence soothed the lingering irritation he felt towards Sun Yan. He found himself drawn to her easy laughter, her effortless charm, a stark contrast to the constant tension that permeated his home life. This is how it should be, he thought, a wave of longing washing over him. Peaceful. Easy. He barely registered the persistent buzzing of his phone, dismissing it as another one of Sun Yan's overreactions. The air in Sun Yan's lungs felt thin, barely enough to sustain her. She had searched everywhere. Every corner of the park, every familiar haunt, every friend's house. Nothing. Her phone felt heavy in her hand, the cold metal a stark contrast to the burning fear that coursed through her veins. She dialed Lin Hao's number again, her voice trembling as it went straight to voicemail. He couldn't. A sudden, horrifying thought pierced through her panic. The car. He had taken Yu with him earlier, promising to drop her off at her piano lesson. Had he forgotten? She sprinted towards the parking lot, her breath catching in her throat. The familiar silver glint of their car caught her eye. She fumbled with the door handle, her fingers numb. Locked. She peered through the window, her vision blurring with tears. Yu was slumped in the back seat, her face flushed, her small body unnaturally still. "Yu," she screamed, banging on the window with the heel of her hand. "Yu's hot, so hot. Yu, answer the phone." Her voice cracked, a raw, animalistic sound of pure terror. Han Cheng and Lu Jia arrived at the parking lot to find Sun Yan frantically trying to break the car window with a rock. The scene that unfolded before them was chilling. "This is a child locked in the car on such a hot day," Lu Jie murmured, his voice laced with horror. Han Cheng's face was grim as he quickly assessed the situation. He pulled Sun Yan back, his voice firm but gentle. "Let me handle this." He used a tire iron to smash the window, the sound echoing in the oppressive stillness of the parking lot. Lin Hao's phone finally stopped buzzing. He reached for it, a vague sense of unease settling in his stomach. He had over 30 missed calls from Sun Yan. What could she possibly want now? He saw the message from Han Cheng. "Emergency. Come to the parking lot immediately." A cold dread gripped him. He excused himself from Jiao Jiao, his mind racing with 1,000 terrifying possibilities. He arrived at the parking lot to find a scene of utter chaos. Sun Yan was cradling Yuyu's limp body, her face streaked with tears and dirt. The sound of her keening wails pierced the air, a gut-wrenching symphony of grief and despair. He stumbled towards them, his legs feeling like lead. What happened?" he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. Han Cheng's eyes met his, filled with a mixture of pity and disgust. "Heatstroke," he said, his voice heavy with unspoken accusation. "She's gone." The world tilted on its axis. Lin Hao's breath hitched in his throat, a strangled sob escaping his lips. He looked at Yuyu, her small, lifeless hand dangling from Sun Yan's grasp. The image of Dongdong's carefree laughter on the swing set flashed before his eyes, a cruel reminder of the life he had stolen from his own daughter. He collapsed to his knees, the weight of his guilt crushing him. "My fault, all my fault." The buzzing in his ears intensified, drowning out Sun Yan's cries, the murmuring voices around him, everything but the deafening roar of his own self-reproach. He had traded his daughter's life for a few hours of stolen peace. A peace that now felt like the coldest, most desolate form of hell. The stale smell of yesterday's dinner clung to the air, a phantom limb of a family meal that felt a lifetime ago. Sun Yan's stomach churned, a knot tightening with each unanswered ring of her mother-in-law's phone. Where was Lin Hao? Where was Yuyu? Her daughter's small, brightly colored raincoat hung by the door, a silent accusation. It was supposed to rain today. Had he even checked the forecast? "Mama, please pick up," she whispered, her voice cracking. She knew her mother-in-law disapproved, saw her as an outsider who had somehow tricked her precious son into marriage. The woman never missed a chance to remind her of her perceived shortcomings, from her city upbringing to her demanding job. But right now, Sun Yan didn't care about any of that. All that mattered was Yuyu. The call went to voicemail again. Panic, a cold hand, gripped Sun Yan's chest. It wasn't like Lin Hao to be unreachable, especially when he had Yuyu. A disjointed memory surfaced, Lin Hao mentioning a lunch with Jiao Jiao, his high school sweetheart. A surge of resentment, bitter and acidic, rose in her throat. Jiao Jiao, always Jiao Jiao. That woman, with her perfect smile and effortless charm, seemed to occupy more and more of Lin Hao's time these days. He'd promised to take Yuyu to the park, but had he changed his plans? Had Hechison Jiao Jiao over his own daughter? The thought was so horrifying she almost dismissed it. But the unease remained, a persistent hum beneath the surface of her fear. She paced the living room, the familiar space suddenly claustrophobic, each object a reminder of the happy family life that seemed to be slipping through her fingers like sand. Finally, her mother-in-law answered, her voice laced with annoyance. "What is it, Sun Yan?" "I'm in the middle of something." "Mama, have you seen Lin Hao?" "He took Yuyu this morning, and I can't reach him." Sun Yan tried to keep her voice even, but the tremor of fear was unmistakable. "He's probably with his friends." "Why are you bothering me with this?" The dismissiveness in her tone was like a slap. Mama, it's important. It's supposed to rain, and Yu, Sun Yan's voice broke. He's not answering his phone. I'm worried. Don't be so dramatic, Sun Yan. He's perfectly capable of looking after his own daughter. The click of the disconnected call echoed in the sudden silence. Sun Yan's hands shook. This wasn't right. Something was terribly wrong. She grabbed her purse and keys, her mind racing. She called Han Cheng, Lin Hao's closest friend. He answered on the third ring, his voice tinged with concern. Sun Yan. Is everything okay? Han Cheng, have you seen Lin Hao today? I can't reach him, and he has Yu. A pause. He was with Jiao earlier. They were supposed to be having lunch. Try calling her. Jiao. Sun Yan's heart sank. I'll try. Thank you. She disconnected before Han Cheng could say anything more. The confirmation of her suspicions sent a wave of nausea through her. He had chosen Jiao. He had prioritized a lunch date over his own daughter. Jiao's phone rang and rang, each ring a hammer blow against Sun Yan's fragile composure. Finally, Jiao answered, her voice bright and cheerful. Hello. Jiao, it's Sun Yan. Is Lin Hao with you? Sun Yan's voice was tight, barely controlled. Oh, Sun Yan. No, he left a while ago. He had to take Yu somewhere. Jiao's voice was light, oblivious. We had a lovely lunch, though. He was telling me about. Sun Yan didn't wait for her to finish. Where did he go? Did he say where he was taking her? I don't know. He just said he had to go. A slight hesitation crept into Jiao's voice, a flicker of uncertainty. Jiao, please think. It's important. Sun Yan's voice was sharp, edged with desperation. I really don't know, Sun Yan. I'm sorry. The line went dead. Sun Yan slammed her phone onto the table, the sound echoing in the empty apartment. Her mind was a whirlwind of fear and anger. Where were they? Where could they be? She called Lu Jie, another of Lin Hao's friends, her voice frantic. Lu Jie, have you seen Lin Hao? He has Yu, and I can't find them. Lin Hao. I saw him earlier at the mall. He was with Dong. They seem to be heading towards the parking lot. Dong. Another child? Sun Yan's confusion deepened. Why would Lin Hao be with another child when he was supposed to be looking after Yu? A chilling thought struck her. Had he forgotten Yu somewhere? Lu Jie, are you sure? Was Yu with them? Sun Yan's voice was barely a whisper. No, I didn't see Yu. Just Lin Hao and Dong. They were buying ice cream. Dong seemed really excited. Lu Jie's voice trailed off, sensing the shift in Sun Yan's tone. Is something wrong? Lu Jie, I think Yu is locked in the car. If we don't find him soon, it could be bad. The words tumbled out, heavy and suffocating. The summer heat, usually a welcome warmth, now felt like a menacing presence. The realization hit Sun Yan like a physical blow. The mall. The parking lot. The summer heat. A vision flashed before her eyes, Yu, trapped in the stifling heat of a locked car, her small face flushed, her cries unheard. She ran out of the apartment, her breath catching in her throat. She had to find her daughter. She had to find her now. The shrill ringing sliced through the fog of Lin Hao's contentment. He glanced at the vibrating phone on the desk, the insistent glow of Sun Yan's name a jarring interruption. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. Not again. He'd told her he'd be busy today, wrapping up the proposal for Han Cheng. He imagined her pacing their small apartment, anxiety etched on her face, her voice already sharp with imagined accusations. He silenced the call. He needed to focus. This deal was crucial. Jiao Jiao's laughter, light and airy, filled the small office, chasing away the remnants of his irritation. She was perched on the edge of his desk, flipping through a magazine, the scent of her perfume a familiar comfort. "Who was that?" she asked, her voice a melodious hum. "Sun Yan," he mumbled, his gaze returning to the document spread before him, the neat rows of figures blurring slightly. He didn't meet Jiao Jiao's eyes. He didn't want to see the flicker of understanding, the knowing look that always seemed to accompany any mention of his wife. The phone rang again, insistent, demanding. Jiao Jiao raised an eyebrow, a silent question hanging in the air. He hesitated, a strange knot tightening in his stomach. He shouldn't ignore her. But he also didn't want to explain. He didn't want to spoil the fragile peace of the afternoon, the brief respite from the tension that had become a constant companion in his marriage. He silenced the call again, the movement abrupt, almost violent. "Everything okay?" Jiao Jiao asked, her voice soft, laced with concern. "Fine," he said, a little too quickly. "Just work stuff. Sun Yan worries too much." The words felt hollow, even to his own ears. He knew they weren't entirely true. He knew Sun Yan's anxiety stemmed from more than just his work. It stemmed from the growing distance between them, the chasm that seemed to widen with every passing day. The phone buzzed with an incoming text. "Sun Yan. Where are you? Yu has been asking for you." He felt a pang of guilt, sharp and unexpected. He'd promised Yu he'd take her to the park today. He'd promised to push her on the swings, to buy her ice cream. He'd forgotten. Lost in the comforting familiarity of Jiao Jiao's presence, he'd forgotten his promise to his daughter. He typed a quick reply, his fingers clumsy on the keys. "Busy with Han Cheng. We'll be back later." He didn't mention Jiao Jiao. He knew Sun Yan wouldn't understand. He knew it would only fuel her suspicions, her insecurities. He sighed, the sound heavy with weariness. He justified his lie by telling himself it was easier this way. Less drama. The phone rang again, the sound grating on his nerves. He finally answered, his voice tight, strained. "Sun Yan, what is it?" "Lin Hao. Where are you? I've been calling you for hours. Yu's been asking for you. She's been crying." Sun Yan's voice was shrill, laced with panic. He winced, pulling the phone away from his ear slightly. "I told you, I'm with Han Cheng," he said, his voice clipped. "We're working on the proposal. It's important." "Important? More important than your own daughter?" Sun Yan's voice cracked. He could hear the tears in her voice, the raw, desperate edge that always sent a shiver down his spine. He closed his eyes, rubbing his temples with his fingers. He hated this. He hated the accusations, the guilt, the suffocating feeling of being trapped. "Sun Yan, please," he said, his voice pleading. "I'll come back after dinner. Can you just calm down? Calm down. Where are you right now? Where did you take Yu?" Sun Yan's voice rose in pitch, her words tumbling over each other in a torrent of anxiety. He felt a flicker of unease. "Take Yu? What was she talking about?" "I didn't take Yu anywhere," he said, his voice rising in exasperation. "She's with you, isn't she?" A sudden, chilling thought pierced through the fog of his annoyance. He hadn't seen Yu Yu since this morning, before he left for the office. He'd assumed she was with Sun Yen. He hadn't even checked. No. She's not with me. I thought she was with you. You said you were taking her to the park. Sun Yen's voice was a high-pitched wail, a sound that tore at his heart. The knot in his stomach tightened, a cold dread spreading through his veins. He remembered now. He'd left Yu Yu in the car. Just for a few minutes, he'd told himself. Just while he grabbed his laptop and said hello to Jiao Jiao. A few minutes that had stretched into hours. Yu Yu's in the car. Sun Yen's voice was barely a whisper, a choked sound filled with terror. The world tilted on its axis. The air thickened, the room spinning around him. He could hear Jiao Jiao's voice, a distant murmur, asking if everything was all right. He couldn't answer. He couldn't breathe. He stumbled out of the office, his legs leaden, his heart pounding against his ribs. He fumbled for his car keys, his hands shaking uncontrollably. He could hear Sun Yen screaming his name, her voice echoing in his ears, a soundtrack to his unfolding nightmare. He ran. He ran towards the parking lot, towards the sleek, silver car glinting under the afternoon sun. He could see the small, limp figure strapped into the car seat, her face pale and still. The windows were rolled up, the interior stiflingly hot. He fumbled with the door handle, his fingers slipping on the hot metal. He yanked the door open, the rush of heat hitting him like a physical blow. Yu Yu. He screamed, his voice raw with anguish. He reached for her, pulling her lifeless body into his arms. Her skin was burning hot, her eyes closed. He held her close, rocking back and forth, his sobs tearing through the silence. He'd killed her. His own daughter. His negligence, his selfishness, had cost her her life. The midday sun beat down on the asphalt, shimmering waves of heat rising from the black surface. Sun Yen's chest heaved, each breath a jagged, painful intake of the scorching air. Her eyes darted from car to car, a desperate scan for the familiar silver sedan. Where had he parked? Had he even told her? A thread of unease, a premonition she'd stubbornly ignored earlier, now tightened its grip around her throat. Lin Hao's dismissiveness echoed in her ears. He'd been so preoccupied, so eager to rejoin Jiao Jiao and her gaggle of friends. Had he even listened when she'd reminded him about Yu Yu? The thought clawed at her, a sickening mix of fear and fury. He'd promised to take care of their daughter. He'd promised. Lin Hao. Where is she? Sun Yen's voice cracked, raw with panic. She grabbed Han Cheng's arm, her fingers digging into his flesh. He said he'd park near the bakery, but I don't see the car. Her voice trailed off, the unspoken fear hanging heavy in the air. Han Cheng's brow furrowed, his gaze mirroring her frantic search. Calm down, Sun Yen, he said, his voice firm but gentle. We'll find her. He glanced towards Lu Jie, who was already several cars down, systematically checking each vehicle. Even as he offered reassurance, a flicker of doubt crossed his face. This wasn't good. The street was lined with cars baking under the relentless sun. A child left inside, he pushed the thought away, refusing to let the image solidify. Lu Jie called out, his voice tight with urgency. Over here. I think this is it. Sun Yen pushed past Han Cheng, her heart hammering against her ribs. It was their car. The silver gleamed under the sun, a cruel mockery of the hope that had surged through her just moments before. As she drew closer, she saw a small figure slumped in the back seat. Yu Yu. Her daughter. Yu Yu. Sun Yen's scream ripped through the air, a primal cry of terror. She yanked at the locked door, her fingers slipping against the hot metal. She's locked in. The windows are up. A woman, a stranger, rushed forward. Stand back, she said, her voice sharp and commanding. She produced a small hammer from her bag and with a swift, decisive blow, shattered the driver's side window. The sound of breaking glass was a discordant note in the suffocating silence. Sun Yen scrambled into the car, her hands shaking as she reached for Yu. The child's skin was burning hot, her face flushed an alarming crimson. Her eyes were closed, her breathing shallow. Yu, baby, wake up. Sun Yen's voice was a desperate whisper. The stranger reached in and felt for a pulse. Her face tightened. We need to call an ambulance. Now. Lin Hao arrived just as the paramedics were lifting Yu onto a stretcher. He'd been laughing, his arm around Jiao Jiao's waist, oblivious to the unfolding tragedy. The laughter died on his lips, replaced by a look of bewilderment. What's going on? He asked, his voice laced with confusion. Sun Yen rounded on him, her eyes blazing with fury. What's going on? She shrieked, her voice raw with pain and rage. Yu is locked in the car and she's almost fainted. Do you know how hot it is today? Do you know how hot it gets inside a closed car? Her words tumbled out, a torrent of accusations. Lin Hao's face paled, his eyes widening in horror as he finally grasped the situation. He stumbled forward, reaching for Yu. Yu. My baby. Sun Yen pushed him away, her grief morphing into a venomous hatred. Don't you dare touch her. You did this. You left her in there. Her voice cracked, the words choked with sobs. How could he? How could he be so careless, so negligent? Her gaze shifted to Jiao Jiao, who stood frozen, her face a mask of shock. Sun Yen's anger burned even hotter. This woman, this distraction had consumed his attention, blinding him to his responsibilities as a father. Han Qing stepped forward, placing a restraining hand on Lin Hao's arm. Lin Hao, let them take her to the hospital. His voice was low, laced with a mixture of pity and admonishment. He saw the devastation etched on Lin Hao's face, the dawning realization of the horrific consequences of his actions. He knew Lin Hao wasn't inherently malicious, but his carelessness, his prioritization of fleeting pleasure over his daughter's safety, had resulted in this unimaginable tragedy. As the ambulance sped away, sirens wailing, Lin Hao collapsed to his knees, his body racked with sobs. The image of Dong Dong, his friend's son, flashed through his mind. Just hours ago, he'd been playing with the boy, marveling at his boundless energy. Now, his own daughter, he couldn't bear the thought. He'd failed her. He'd failed Sun Yen. He'd failed himself. The street, moments before bustling with life, now seemed eerily silent, the only sound the hollow echo of Sun Yen's cries. The heat, once an oppressive presence, now felt like a chilling premonition of the desolate emptiness that awaited them. The sun continued to beat down, indifferent to the human drama unfolding beneath its gaze. The sterile white walls of the hospital seemed to pulse with a sickly fluorescent hum. Sun Yen's breath hitched in ragged gasps, each one a physical manifestation of the icy dread that coiled in her gut. The gurney, bearing a small, still form covered by a thin sheet, disappeared behind the double doors of the emergency room. The doors swung shut with a final, ominous click, severing her connection to Yu, to hope itself. Her knees threatened to buckle, but she braced herself against the cold, unyielding wall, the chill seeping through the thin fabric of her dress. Just breathe, Sun Yen, she told herself, the words a hollow echo in the cavern of her fear. She'll be fine. She has to be. But the mantra offered no comfort. Her mind conjured horrific images: Yu's small face, flushed and feverish, her little hands limp and unresponsive. The image clawed at her, tearing at the fragile threads of her composure. Lin Hao stood a few feet away, his face ashen, his eyes fixed on the closed doors. He seemed to have aged 10 years in the past hour. The bravado he'd displayed earlier had vanished, replaced by a raw, naked fear that mirrored her own. He hadn't spoken a word since they'd arrived, the weight of his guilt suffocating him. Sun Yan wanted to scream, to rage at him, to unleash the torrent of accusations that churned within her. But the words caught in her throat, choked by the knot of terror that tightened with every passing second. Time stretched into an agonizing eternity. The rhythmic beeping of medical equipment, the hushed whispers of nurses, the occasional wail of a distant siren, every sound amplified her anxiety, each tick of the clock a hammer blow against her sanity. She watched Lin Hao, his shoulders slumped, his hands clenched into fists. Did he feel it too, this agonizing blend of fear and guilt? Or was he lost in his own world of regret, replaying the events that had led them to this precipice of despair? She couldn't bring herself to ask. The chasm that had opened between them felt too vast, too insurmountable. Jiao Jiao stood beside him, her hand resting tentatively on his arm. Her presence, once a source of Sun Yan's simmering resentment, now felt insignificant, almost absurd in the face of this overwhelming fear. Jiao Jiao's face was pale, her eyes wide with concern, but there was a detachment in her expression that grated on Sun Yan's raw nerves. She doesn't understand, Sun Yan thought bitterly. She can't possibly comprehend the depth of this pain, this terror. Suddenly, the double doors swung open, and a doctor emerged, his face grim, his eyes filled with a weary sadness. "Are you the parents?" he asked, his voice gentle but firm. Sun Yan nodded, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. Lin Hao stepped forward, his voice barely a whisper. "How is she?" "Is she?" The doctor's gaze softened, a flicker of compassion in his tired eyes. "We're doing everything we can," he said, but the words lacked conviction. "She's in critical condition. The heatstroke, it was severe. We've intubated her and started an 4, but," he trailed off, the unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. Sun Yan felt a wave of nausea wash over her. "No," she thought, "this can't be happening." She reached out to grasp Lin Hao's arm, seeking some semblance of support, but he recoiled as if touched by fire. The movement, small and seemingly insignificant, pierced her with a sharp, unexpected pain. He couldn't even bear her touch. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. Hours blurred into a nightmarish haze of whispered prayers and stifled sobs. Sun Yan paced the sterile waiting room, her steps echoing the frantic beat of her heart. She replayed every conversation, every argument, every missed opportunity to tell Yu how much she loved her. The guilt gnawed at her, a relentless, insidious parasite. Had she been too focused on her failing marriage, on her own anxieties, to truly see the danger her daughter was in? Had she, in some way, contributed to this tragedy? Lin Hao remained silent, his face a mask of despair. He sat hunched over in a plastic chair, his gaze fixed on the floor, oblivious to Jiao Jiao's attempts to comfort him. Even Dong Dong, who had accompanied them to the hospital, sensed the gravity of the situation, his usual boisterous energy replaced by a quiet solemnity. He sat beside Lin Hao, his small hand resting on his father's knee, a silent offering of comfort. The contrast between Dong Dong's innocent affection and Lin Hao's desolate withdrawal was a stark, painful reminder of what Sun Yan had lost. The doctor reappeared, his face etched with a profound sadness. Sun Yan's breath caught in her throat. She knew, even before he spoke, that the news would shatter her world. "I'm so sorry," he began, his voice choked with emotion. "The patient was sent too late." There was nothing more we could do. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Time seemed to stop. The rhythmic beeping of the machines, the hushed whispers, the distant sirens all faded into a dull, distant hum. Sun Yen stared at the doctor, her mind struggling to grasp the enormity of his words. No, she thought, this can't be true. My daughter, she whispered, her voice barely audible. My Yu, she's gone. The words were a hollow echo of the fear that had consumed her for hours. The dam finally broke, and the torrent of grief she had held back for so long erupted, tearing through her like a raging storm. A primal scream ripped through the sterile silence of the waiting room, a raw, agonizing expression of a mother's shattered heart. The fluorescent lights of the funeral home hummed, a sterile, buzzing counterpoint to the raw, animalistic grief tearing through Sun Yen. Her breath hitched in ragged gasps, each inhale a shallow struggle against the crushing weight on her chest. Her eyes, bloodshot and swollen, darted around the stark room, searching for something, anything, to anchor her to reality. But reality was a fractured, distorted thing. Yu. Her Yu. Gone. The small, brightly colored coffin seemed to mock her with its finality. Just yesterday, those same colors had adorned Yuyu's favorite dress, the one with the little embroidered butterflies. Had she known? Had she sensed, even in her childish innocence, the cold hand of death reaching for her? Sun Yen's stomach churned. No. No, she couldn't think like that. Lin Hao stood a few feet away, his shoulders slumped, his face a mask of desolate despair. He hadn't spoken since they'd arrived. He simply stared at the coffin, his eyes hollow, vacant. Sun Yen wanted to scream. To rage. To tear at him, to claw at his face until he felt a fraction of the pain that was consuming her. But her body felt leaden, heavy, unresponsive. All her energy was concentrated in that tight, burning knot in her chest. How could you? The words rasped out, barely audible, yet they hung in the air, heavy with accusation. Her voice, usually so vibrant, so full of life, was now a brittle whisper. She wanted to shake him, to force him to look at her, to acknowledge the magnitude of his failure. But what was the point? What could he possibly say? What words could ever bridge the chasm of loss that stretched between them? He flinched, as if struck. His eyes, finally meeting hers, were filled with a torment so profound it almost stopped her cold. Almost. But the flicker of guilt, the raw agony etched on his face, wasn't enough. It could never be enough. He began, his voice cracking. The words trailed off, lost in the suffocating silence. You didn't what, Lin Hao? You didn't think. You didn't care. The burning knot in her chest tightened, constricting her throat, making it difficult to breathe. He shuddered, his head falling into his hands. I'm a beast, he mumbled, his voice muffled. I'm the one who hurt Yu. The admission, so raw, so devoid of pretense, ripped through Sun Yen's carefully constructed wall of anger. A wave of nausea washed over her. He knew. He knew what he'd done. The realization hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't some terrible accident. This was negligence. A cold, hard truth settled in her gut. He had chosen Jiao, chosen his selfish desires, over his own daughter. Over Yu. She turned away, unable to bear the sight of him, the sound of his choked sobs. She saw Han Cheng and Lu Jie standing near the entrance, their faces etched with concern. Lu Jie reached out a hand, her eyes filled with sympathy, but Sun Yen flinched away. She couldn't bear to be touched. Not now. Not ever. Later, much later, after the formalities, after the hollow condolences, after the world had blurred into a meaningless kaleidoscope of grief, Sun Yen found herself sitting across from Lin Hao in a sterile, impersonal office. Divorce papers lay on the table between them, stark white against the dark wood. The silence in the room was thick, oppressive. Sun Yen felt strangely detached, as if watching this scene unfold from a distance. Lin Hao picked up a pen, his hand trembling. He looked at her, his eyes pleading, searching for something, perhaps forgiveness, perhaps understanding. But Sun Yen's heart was a barren wasteland. There was nothing left to give. "You don't deserve to see her," she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. The words echoed in the quiet room, final, irrevocable. She watched as his hand stilled, the pen hovering over the paper. He closed his eyes, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. He signed the papers. A simple act, yet it felt like the culmination of years of unspoken resentment, of unmet needs, of a love that had slowly withered and died. She signed too, her hand steady, her gaze fixed on the stark black ink. As they left the office, the setting sun cast long, distorted shadows on the pavement. Sun Yen saw Dong Dong running towards Lin Hao, his small face alight with joy. "Papa," he cried, throwing his arms around Lin Hao's legs. Lin Hao picked him up, hugging him tightly. The scene, so ordinary, so heartbreakingly normal, twisted a knife in Sun Yen's gut. She thought of Yu, of the bright, infectious laughter that would never fill their home again. Turning away, Sun Yen walked into the gathering dusk, the image of Lin Hao and Dong Dong seared into her memory. A bitter taste filled her mouth. It wasn't the taste of grief, not anymore. It was the taste of ashes. The ashes of a love that had burned too brightly, too quickly, leaving behind only emptiness and regret. The echoes of Yu's laughter, once so vibrant, now faded into the silence, a haunting reminder of what she had lost. And as she walked away, she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that she would never forgive him. Never. The sterile, antiseptic smell of the hospital clung to Sun Yen like a shroud. Her throat felt raw, her eyes burning, yet she couldn't seem to shed a single tear. Numbness had settled over her, a heavy blanket smothering the screams building inside. She saw Lin Hao pacing the waiting room floor, his face a canvas of despair. He ran a hand through his hair, the same gesture he'd made countless times during their arguments, back when their problems felt so monumental, so insurmountable. Now, compared to the gaping void Yu had left, they seemed trivial, insignificant specks of dust. How could they have wasted so much time on such petty grievances when their world was about to shatter? She wanted to scream at him, to claw at his face, to make him feel the same agonizing emptiness that was consuming her. But what was the point? Yu was gone. Her bright laughter, her tiny hand reaching for Sun Yen's, her sweet, childish scent all gone, swallowed by the suffocating silence of the sterile room. Lin Hao stopped pacing and looked at her, his eyes red-rimmed. "The doctor will be out soon," he mumbled, his voice hollow, devoid of the usual irritation that had laced their conversations for the past few months. It was replaced with something far more chilling, defeat. Sun Yen wanted to tell him that it wouldn't matter, that no doctor could bring her back, but the words caught in her throat, a choked sob threatening to erupt. Jiao Jiao sat beside Lin Hao, her hand resting on his arm. Sun Yen's vision blurred, the gesture a cruel twist of the knife. Had he been with Jiao Jiao when Yu when? The thought was too unbearable to complete. Sun Yen closed her eyes, her stomach churning. She couldn't breathe, the air thick and suffocating. She had to get out, to escape the suffocating pity in Jiao Jiao's eyes, the guilt radiating from Lin Hao. The waiting room door opened, and a doctor emerged, his face grim. Lin Hao sprang to his feet. "Dong Dong, he asked, his voice tight with anxiety. Sun Yan's confusion deepened. Dong Dong. Why was he asking about Dong Dong? Where was Yu? Where was her daughter? Dong Dong's condition is very serious. He needs a liver transplant. The doctor's words hung heavy in the air, each syllable a hammer blow against the fragile remnants of their hope. Sun Yan stared at the doctor, uncomprehending. Liver transplant? Dong Dong. This couldn't be happening. It was all a terrible, twisted nightmare. She would wake up soon, wouldn't she? Wake up and find Yu asleep in her bed, her small chest rising and falling with each breath. She stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a sob that finally broke free. Lin Hao turned to her, his face etched with a mixture of grief and confusion mirroring her own. Sun Yan Yu, he started, his voice cracking. The realization crashed over Sun Yan like a tidal wave, the weight of it crushing her. Yu wasn't here. She wasn't lost. She was the unspoken truth hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Lin Hao had been worried about Dong Dong, not Yu. He hadn't even mentioned her. Where is she? Sun Yan whispered, her voice barely audible. The words felt foreign, detached, as if they belonged to someone else. Lin Hao flinched, his eyes filling with a fresh wave of anguish. He avoided her gaze, focusing on a point somewhere over her shoulder. The car, he choked out, the words barely a whisper. I left her in the car. The pieces clicked into place, forming a horrific, unbearable picture. The summer heat. The locked car. Yu, trapped, alone. The image seared itself into Sun Yan's mind, a branding iron burning an eternal scar into her soul. A strangled cry tore from her throat, raw and primal. She lunged at Lin Hao, her fists pounding against his chest, her nails digging into his skin. You killed her, she screamed, her voice ragged with grief and rage. You killed our daughter. Lin Hao didn't resist, his body slumping under the force of her blows. Tears streamed down his face, mingling with the snot and saliva dripping from his chin. He looked like a broken man, a hollow shell of the person she once loved, the father of her child. Han Cheng and Lu Jie rushed forward, pulling Sun Yan away from Lin Hao. Their concerned voices washed over her, meaningless and distant. She couldn't hear them, couldn't see them. All she could see was Yu's face, her innocent eyes, her sweet smile. All she could hear was the silence, the deafening silence that had replaced her daughter's laughter. The world around her faded into a blur of noise and movement. She felt hands on her arms, guiding her, supporting her. She was vaguely aware of being led away, down a long corridor, the sterile smell of the hospital clinging to her like a death shroud. The news about Dong Dong, the liver transplant, the frantic activity in the waiting room, it all seemed distant, irrelevant. Nothing mattered anymore. Her daughter was gone. And she would never, ever forgive him. Back at the house, the silence was even more deafening. Every corner, every toy, every photograph screamed Yu's name. Sun Yan wandered through the empty rooms, her heart a leaden weight in her chest. She picked up Yu's favorite doll, clutching it to her chest, inhaling the faint scent of baby powder and sunshine that still clung to its soft fabric. It was a cruel reminder of what she had lost, a constant, agonizing ache in her soul. She collapsed onto Yu's bed, burying her face in the pillow, the scent of her daughter filling her lungs. The tears finally came, a torrent of grief and despair that threatened to drown her. She cried for Yu, for the life stolen too soon, for the future they would never have. She cried for herself, for the gaping hole in her heart that would never heal. And she cried for Lin Hao, for the man she once loved, the man who had destroyed their world. Even in her grief, a flicker of something akin to pity stirred within her. He would carry this burden, this guilt, for the rest of his life. But it wouldn't bring Yu back. It would never bring her back.